You can probably tell by the name of this video, but today we're going to be talking about the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Throughout the video, I'm going to write down all of the identifications I talk about over here to the right, just to make it a little bit easier to comprehend the more important information. Before we jump in, though, we need a little bit of exposition. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 made slavery illegal above the 3630 parallel. As was the case with most things, this angered Southern slave owners who wanted the political and economic advantages that came with the spread of slavery. During this time, people migrated west to Nebraska Territory to start farms and build lives for themselves. Being above the 3630 line made slavery illegal in this area. Although it was now technically against the law for slaves to be owned on this land, people still argued about it. Also happening during this period were speculations for where to put the proposed transcontinental railroad. Many slave owners wanted it somewhere in the South because it would help their industry supported by slavery grow and make the nation more dependent on slavery. Enter Illinois Senator Stephen A. Douglas. Douglas pushed for a possible central route for the railroad that began in Chicago. He was convinced that this new business brought by the railroad would help the property he owned in the city boom. Being a politician, he was convinced he was right and he was determined to get whatever he wanted, no matter what it took. This led him to create the Act to organize the territories of Nebraska and Kansas, or Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 for short. This piece of legislation separated the Nebraska Territory into the territories of Kansas and Nebraska. The direct purpose of this act was to appeal to Southern farmers so they would allow Douglas to pursue the Midwestern route for the Transcontinental Railroad. He did this by introducing the idea of popular sovereignty. States get to choose by vote whether or not to allow slavery. Conflict concerning this new policy arose due to differing opinions concerning it. For people who supported slavery, this might as well have been a gift straight from God. It gave slavery another chance above the 3630 line, where there would not have been one otherwise. For abolitionists, on the other hand, this was very, very upsetting. This new policy effectively repealed the Missouri Compromise they had worked so hard to pass. Sectional tensions rose as a result of this new controversy. As soon as people heard about popular sovereignty, they did everything in their power to sway the vote in their preferred direction. At this point in time, Congress was evenly split between the two causes, 16 slave states against 16 free states. Slavery supporters jumped at the opportunity to gain another state for their side and control the government. During the vote for whether Kansas was going to be admitted as a slave state or as a free state, many farmers from bordering slave states crossed the border and illegally voted in an attempt to sway the vote. In the end, they were successful, and the slave supporters won the vote. Knowing that the Southerners could not have possibly won by the reported margin, the Northerners protested and held rebellions. They established a government of their own that did not support slavery. So now Kansas had a fraudulent slave-supporting government and an illegal abolitionist government. Things didn't go very well from here. It wasn't too long before there was actual violence. It started with the shooting of a free soiler named Charles Dow. This sparked a series of events collectively known as Bleeding Kansas. There were arguments, houses and shops were burned, people died. Word of the conflict eventually made its way through the entire country. In Congress, a senator named Charles Sumner gave his famous "The Crime Against Kansas" speech, in which he made fun of a South Carolina senator and his pro-slavery opinion on the matter. The next day, Sumner was almost beaten to death with a cane on the Senate floor by the South Carolina senator's cousin, Preston Brooks. This act of violence accomplished nothing but increasing the sectional divide between North and South. Another person who increased the split between North and South was John Brown. He believed that the only way to get what he wanted was through violent rebellion. On his first mission, he and his sons effectively hacked up several supporters of slavery with broadswords. Yes, broadswords. He later planned to hold a slave insurrection in Harper's Ferry, Virginia. His plan was to begin the revolt and have all the slaves rise up with him against their masters. They didn't. John Brown was caught and hanged for his crimes. Along with all of this violence, the Kansas-Nebraska Act also paved the way for the creation of the new Republican Party that opposed the admission of Kansas to the Union as a slave state. Its first presidential candidate was Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln spoke out about slavery against the man who created the act, Stephen A. Douglas, in his Peoria speech in Illinois in October of 1854. As with everything else during this time period, his speech only served to increase sectional feelings. As we have learned today, the Kansas-Nebraska Act created the territories of Kansas and Nebraska. It put into effect the policy of popular sovereignty. It caused the events of Bleeding Kansas. It made radical extremists such as John Brown, and it allowed for the creation of the Republican Party. Overall, it did nothing but increase sectional tensions and drive America closer to the Civil War. Thanks for watching.